I have some good news and some bad news. We break down Patriots OTAs here on PatsCast.
New coach, new tone, Vrabel in the zone, OTAs day one, let the grit be shown. Drake in the fire, learning on the fly, 4 picks early.
On the PatsCast, I'm Brad Whitaker. Good to be with you. Patriots just wrapped their first publicly available OTA session, and I'm going to break down the good, the bad, and the ugly, and unfortunately, there's plenty of bad and ugly to report from the very first Patriots practice that we're really aware of as fans. So going to recap OTAs, the first day publicly available in front of the media with Mike Vrabel, some of the competitive 11-on-11 drills, of course, what happened with Drake Maye today, the defensive highlights, talk about some key absences and limited players, and of course, the exciting stuff, offensive line rotations. Going to break that down as well. I know that's what everyone's waiting for. But we'll start with Drake Maye because he had a rough day, or at the very least, a rough start to OTAs, a rough start, if you will, to the 2025 campaign. Now, take it with a grain of salt. This is early on. He's learning Josh McDaniels' offense. Extremely complex compared to what he did with Alex Van Pelt last year. It's going to take some time, right? It took Mac Jones time, and he almost won Rookie of the Year, and I think Drake Maye is a much better quarterback than Mac Jones. But overall, Drake Maye went 11 of 17 passing today, 4 interceptions, and at least 2 sacks. It's always hard to tell how many sacks happen during these, they're not wearing pads, they're obviously not tackling the quarterback, they're never tackling the quarterback, but just 2 sacks, apparently, given up today. But again, a rough start. Drake Maye threw 4 interceptions in his first 8 plays. Lots of it had to do with miscommunication and poor throws. Gave up 2 interceptions to Christian Gonzalez alone, who had one hell of a practice. We'll get to that in just a minute. Craig Woodson, the late-round draft pick, also had an interception. And Del Pettis, remember him, made the roster last year. I expect him to make a bit of a leap in year 2. He also had a pick from Drake Maye. One came on a bad floated pass to CJ Dipper, who's one of the undrafted tight ends that the Patriots picked up, and a misfire to Kyle Williams, who unfortunately struggled a bit today. So, we don't have the standout wide receiver number 1 that we thought we might see immediately from Kyle Williams, but again, these things are going to take time, and Kyle Williams is not going to be a number 1 guy this year. I think it's pretty safe to say. Did recover a little bit, though, down the road. Drake Maye went 7 of 8 in later periods, including a deep ball to Javon Baker against Christian Gonzalez. I'll get to Baker in just a second. In addition to that throw to Baker, hit Kyle Williams on a nice corner route at one point. That was really the only good catch from Williams all day. But again, this is expected in Josh McDaniels' complex offense. I think a concern that I have for Drake Maye is, has he really worked on his mechanics this offseason? That's always hard for a quarterback. Tom Brady tweaked his mechanics just slightly every year over the course of 20 years and looked like a different passer at the end of his career. But so far, it doesn't really look like Drake Maye has done much, at least from early impressions. That hitch in his delivery that shows up at times, shows off quite often, it's back, and it's noted. Didn't really work on it in the offseason, it seems. So I'm not going to be really low on Drake Maye. Again, there's a lot of potential there. We know the raw traits. But it's always going to be a concern until it's addressed. Is this going to be lingering throughout his entire career, throwing interceptions? Drake Maye threw a few interceptions last year that were, drop passes by Kayshon Boutte and Douglas and company. And there were a lot that shouldn't have been interceptions, but he also made some really bad throws last year too. And I think a lot of this probably has to do with the complexity of Josh McDaniels' offense, trying to go through his progression, make those quick reads, get rid of the ball in time. The receivers, especially the young guys, trying to learn that offense as well. It's going to take some time. And this was a practice that we've seen in New England time and time again since really 2019, where the defense continues to dominate and the offense is attempting to kind of build some momentum. Now, you hope with Josh McDaniels, with Drake Maye year 2, with some of the weapons that they picked up, Stephon Diggs eventually being in that mix, they will gain some momentum throughout OTAs and certainly into training camp, and the offense will be fine heading into the regular season, but I'm not going to let up on this Drake Maye interception thing. Like, it was a problem last year. It could be a problem not just this year. It could be a problem long term. He really has to learn to clean this up. Again, going to go back to the Mac Jones example. Decent tight end to interception ratio as a rookie. We saw him the 3 seasons after that, Mac Jones, throwing picks left and right, pick sixes at times. I think Drake Maye is going to make a similar adjustment under Josh McDaniels and is going to limit some of those bad throws. But one of those pick sixes, or one of those interceptions, was a pick six to Christian Gonzalez today. So not very good, but he really shined. Defensive standout. Could be, if he's not already, considered the best cornerback in the NFL heading into the 2025 season. Again, 2 interceptions, including a pick six. All-pro caliber player, we know that. Maybe the best in the game. Really picking up the defensive system very well. And that's going to happen earlier, right? Defenses are a little less complex, particularly when compared to Josh McDaniels' offense. The defense is going to go out there and they're going to dominate some of these early practices. So I'm not too surprised about that. But Gonzalez, Terrell Williams picking up this new defense, which is very different from what the Patriots have run over the last 2.5 decades. I know Terrell Williams is out with a health issue. We hope he'll be back soon, but it is his defense. And Christian Gonzalez adapting to that new defensive system well, able to read the quarterback's eyes. Woodson's pick came on a dive. Of course, Del Pettis had an interception. Keon White, Christian Barmore, who's back out there, he's cleared to play after the blood clot issues, had a dominant practice as well. Milton Williams and Harold Landry were also impactful. They were kind of rotating in and out. Obviously veteran players, so they don't need as much time on the field early on, but they're going to have those rotations, particularly with the starters. But defense looks ready to go, which is not much of a surprise. Hopefully they actually have a pass rush this year, but with Keon White having a fire under his ass with some of the veterans around him, Christian Barmore coming back, Milton Williams in the mix, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane. They also added Farmer and Swinson from LSU in the draft. Patriots are really going to have a decent pass rush, in my opinion, this year. It's going to look very different from what we saw with Gerard Mayo and DeMarcus Covington last year. So, look, it's going to be easy to focus on the negative with Drake Maye today, but he did bounce back late, and the Patriots have their identity back in terms of being a hard-hitting, frustrate the quarterback type defense. And, you know, they're not hitting hard. They're not wearing pads. They're not going to be wearing pads until a week or 2 into training camp this year. It's going to take some time. And Mike Vrabel said this before today's practice. It's going to take some time to understand who are the most physical and so-called violent players out there. And that's also going to change how the offense looks. You know, how's the offensive line? Are they going to look better when they're in pads? Are they going to look worse? We're not going to know the answer to that question for quite a few months, but I'm really not surprised to see the defense performing this well. Josh McDaniels' scheme, very diverse in terms of looks. Lots of different zone gap runs, really mixing it up there. I'm not sure we're going to see the wide zone as much as we saw last year with Alex Van Pelt trying to implement more of a West Coast offense. But they're running plenty of inside zone, and they're going to mix it up a little bit with the wide zone at times. But power runs, gaps, duos, all the Josh McDaniels stuff is back. They ran a lot of reverses, screens, deep shots, fake reverses. Ton of complexity with this offense. So it's really no surprise why the offense started 7 of 19 passing, early sloppiness. It's going to take some time for the millionth time. But there were some standout players. Travion Henderson, he's the real deal. And, you know, you hope he's the real deal if you're going to draft a running back early in the second round that is a first-round caliber player. Explosive plays, catching screens, yards after catch, flare passes. We know he's an incredible blocker. Going to be an effective third down back, and they're going to mix him in at times. I mentioned Javon Baker earlier. He had a contested back shoulder catch against Christian Gonzalez, which I haven't seen the video. I don't know. If someone finds the video, let me know. But turned out to be the catch of the day. And as I've said, I am not giving up on Javon Baker. We saw what happened last year with Kayshon Boutte, right? He had a rookie year where he got some playing time week 1, struggled a little bit, didn't get both of his feet down, didn't see the field much after that, and then probably was Drake Maye's first or second most reliable weapon as a rookie. Really took a year 2 leap. Keep an eye on Javon Baker. I know Mike Vrabel is putting his arm around him and really pushing him. He could leapfrog Jalen Polk, and as I said a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Polk, who Mike Vrabel didn't draft, gets cut and Javon Baker finds a spot on the roster. Looks pretty good right off the bat, at least getting a contested, difficult back shoulder catch that he plucked out of the air against Christian Gonzalez. That's what you really like to see. Undrafted free agent Efton Chisholm, who I also had making the roster. Slow but quick, as he said many times, really does look like Wes Welker out there with a little bit of Julian Edelman flair, just not quite as fast, but might be as quick. Jump cuts, catches, really looks the part out there, and it is quite surprising that he wasn't drafted. Did run a 4.71 40-yard dash, so I think that's the main reason, but Patriots could have gotten an absolute steal taking him in undrafted free agency, and they're not going to be running him as a boundary X wide receiver straight down the field. He's not going to be running straight lines. He's going to be running quick slants and curl routes and jump cuts and different things like that. Efton Chisholm, I think, is going to make this roster and could be an impactful player pretty early on. I also mentioned Kyle Williams had a rough day, did have one solid catch that was arguably Drake Maye's best throw other than the Javon Baker one that I just mentioned. 1 of 4, was targeted on 2 of the interceptions, but the explosiveness is there, the hands are there. It's just going to take some time to build that chemistry. I don't think Drake Maye and Demario Douglas ever truly built that chemistry that they needed last year, and maybe that is another red flag for Drake Maye, is these small-bodied, slot receiver type players. Can he build chemistry with them really quickly? He loves to throw on the outside. He loves the tall boundary X type guys, but we know what Josh McDaniels likes. He just basically throws 5 slot receivers out there and screws with the defense, and Drake Maye is going to have to pick that up. But again, super early. I'm not that concerned about this. We knew the offense was going to struggle, especially with all the young players and the weapons that they added. And you don't have Stephon Diggs out there, and we're not sure when he'll be back. Now to the exciting stuff. Offensive line. Will Campbell, of course, was the starting left tackle. It looked like Cole Strange was starting at left guard, but there was a ton of rotation out there. Garrett Bradbury was, of course, the starting center. He was the veteran that they added in free agency. Michael Wenu at the right guard spot. And Morgan Moses, who they picked up in free agency from New York, starting at right tackle. Now, is this going to be your week 1 starting lineup? No, probably not, but I think it's a good place to start. 3 of those 5 are locked up, right? Will Campbell's not going anywhere. He's going to play at left tackle for at least his rookie year. I think that's a sure thing. Michael Wenu, focusing on right guard, not going to mess with the tackle stuff anymore unless somebody goes down with an injury. But you got some depth there now at the tackle positions. I think he's going to stick at the right guard spot. And then, of course, Morgan Moses, who is in his mid-30s, but is one of the most, if not the most durable tackle in the NFL. More than competent player on the far right side. Those positions are pretty much locked up. So the competition at this point comes down to left guard, which you're going to start with Cole Strange because he's the so-called veteran on the roster, and the other veteran, Garrett Bradbury, who has plenty of experience at the center position. But there are going to be players that challenge for that. Layden Robinson, of course, one of those players that could win the starting left guard job. If I had to bet money on it, I would say Layden Robinson will beat out Cole Strange. Originally, I thought Cole Strange might actually win the center job, but they added Garrett Bradbury, and they drafted Jared Wilson, the very effective center out of the University of Georgia, who I do think will ultimately win the job. Garrett Bradbury did not do great last year at Minnesota at the center spot. Probably still an upgrade from Ben Brown, who's on the roster, but Jared Wilson, they drafted him to be their long-term starting center. High IQ guy, leader in the locker room. I think he's going to win that job fairly quickly. So left guard is really the spot to keep an eye out for. Maybe City So is back in that mix. I'm not sure. They also signed Wes Schweitzer, who's a veteran, and he's been kind of part of that starting rotation at times throughout different OTA periods, but it looks like Cole Strange at least is number one on the depth chart right now, but Wes Schweitzer is pretty close, but I still think Layden Robinson might be the guy that ultimately wins that job. Vidarian Lowe and DeMontre Jacobs were shuffling on the offensive line as backup tackles. Great to see. Do not want to see those guys as starters again, but do think Vidarian Lowe looked pretty good last year as a backup player, and DeMontre Jacobs, solid right tackle backup, but I really hope that Caden Wallace can ultimately leapfrog him on the depth chart. We'll see if DeMontre Jacobs actually makes the team. As for Will Campbell, how did he perform? He did give up some pressures to Keon White at times, so that's going to take a little bit. But the cool thing about Will Campbell is I guess he is just glued to the hip of Morgan Moses, the right tackle. They have lockers right next to each other. They work out together after practice. Will Campbell's just a sponge, absorbing everything he can from Morgan Moses because he knows, hey, I'm lining up opposite you. We're both the two most important players for protecting Drake Maye. Again, he struggled a little bit today, giving up pressures to Keon White, but Will Campbell has that job, at least as a rookie. We'll see if we get into the kick him over to left guard talk in year 2 or whatever, depending on how he performs. But, some rookie growing pains, first day of OTAs. Now, in terms of absences, Ramondre Stevenson missed practice today. His father passed away, so prayers up to the Stevenson family. Stephon Diggs, of course, going to be missing some time. City So was missing. Joshua Farmer as well, who they drafted. Jalen Polk was limited. Micah Wenu was limited. So was Morgan Moses, Jared Wilson, Jabril Peppers, and Kyle Duggar. Tons of rotations throughout this. There's so many players, right? You have, 90-plus players out there. So there's going to be a lot of rotations. So those guys were fairly limited, but they did get some action out there. Marte Mapu, Mac Hollins, and Vidarian Lowe were all non-participants. And then, of course, safety depth, Jalen Hawkins and Craig Woodson stepped up quite a bit in 11-on-11s, and Craig Woodson, of course, had that interception. I'm really impressed with Craig Woodson. I mean, this is the guy we kind of overlooked in the draft, but safety is a sneaky need for this team, and I think he may be a good long-term solution there, and he's really stepping up early on. Now, in terms of the kicker competition, Borregales, the kicker that they drafted in the late 6th round, went 4-4 on field goals, and then John Parker Romo, the former San Antonio Brahma from the UFL, made just 2 of 4. So struggled in comparison. I think it's Andres Borregales' job. Good to stash Parker Romo on the practice squad, have him just in case. Has a great foot, but does struggle with accuracy. We'll see how Borregales is in cold weather. He's been in South Florida his entire life. That's the big question mark with him, but usually that's not much of an issue with kickers coming into the NFL. They come from all over the place, and was it Adam Vinatieri? I think he grew up in a southern state, or was it the other kicker who came after Vinatieri, whose name's slipping from my mind, the greatest kicker in Patriots history, aside from Vinatieri, but it'll probably be fine. I'm not too worried about it, but Andres Borregales will win that kicker's job. Mike Vrabel, definitely competitive OTAs, more intense from what we've seen with Bill Belichick's teaching camps this time of year. Hands-on coaching, really spent most of the time focusing on the offense, which is a bit of a surprise, right? You would expect with Terrell Williams out right now that Mike Vrabel might shift more to the defensive side, and Josh McDaniels, former head coach, would coach the offense a little bit more, but clearly the defense is 5 or 6 steps ahead of the offense at this point, so Mike Vrabel is focusing most of his energy there early on. Supported Stevenson, of course, in his press conference before, emphasized fundamentals, huddle efficiency, avoiding repeated mistakes. Also talked about, I think Taylor Kyles asked him a question about physicality. He said, we're not going to be able to determine physicality through OTAs. That's really a training camp thing. So preaching violence, as the Patriots have said all offseason, we're not going to see that until July or August comes around. Also confirmed that there will be joint practices this August with the Washington Commanders in Foxborough, and the Patriots will be traveling to Minnesota for a joint practice with the Vikings. But overall, real culture change. I don't know if you had the chance to watch the Forged in Foxborough docu-series, mini-series. I don't really know what to call it. It's kind of Hard Knocksy, but not really. There's no narration or, there's kind of a lack of human interest stories there. It's more just video clips, positive PR because the New England Patriots are putting it out, but a lot of transparency there at the same time. And, this practice today was open to the media. We're seeing this mini-series now that really shows a lot of great practice highlights and the hard work that particularly the young players are putting in. And they talked about Stephon Diggs and all of that. It's a completely different culture from what we saw in New England last year with Drake Maye. And as Mike Vrabel said with a little bit of color, I don't really care what happened last season. I'm focused right now on today. I'm focused on tomorrow and the next day and developing really good players that are going to put the team first. And it kind of feels like old school Belichick. And of course, that's who Mike Vrabel learned from. But I think you're going to get the positives of the iron fist of the early head coach of Bill Belichick, but you're still going to get the player empathy to an extent that you got with Drake Maye. Mike Vrabel can connect with his players, even though he's very tough. I think this is the perfect cultural fit for this organization, and that's going to be the main reason, right? I know the Patriots have an easier schedule this year, had a strong offseason, strong NFL draft. I think the offense still is missing a piece or two, but this was always going to be a 2-year rebuild on that side of the football. But overall, it's hard not to be encouraged about where the Patriots are right now, even though Drake Maye struggled quite a bit early on in practice today. But key takeaways from today's OTAs: Maye's growth in Josh McDaniels' system. It's going to be critical for his development, particularly not throwing interceptions, making smart decisions, knowing how to make those quick reads, go through the progression, and, make audibles at the line. I think that's going to be the biggest learning curve for Drake Maye, but it's ultimately going to be what helps him the most, is he's going to have the resources at his disposal to protect himself and make adjustments at the line that he really didn't have last year in Alex Van Pelt's West Coast offense, which focused more on the center, making line changes and things like that. We know that's not what Josh McDaniels does. He puts all the pressure there on the quarterback. So Drake Maye, it's going to take some time for him to figure that out. But overall, it's nice to see him out there working with Josh McDaniels. Christian Gonzalez continues to just dominate on the defensive side of the football. Of course, you now have Carlton Davis lining up opposite him. Going to be hard for offenses. Two good receivers. You're going against T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. You have two cornerbacks who can shut those guys down. Jamar Chase actually said Carlton Davis is the toughest cornerback in the league that he's gone against. So that matchup will happen later in the season. Offensive line cohesion, a lot of rotation, trying to figure out the best combination, particularly at left guard and at center. Will Campbell did struggle a little bit with Keon White, but he is growing. He is learning a lot from Morgan Moses. And yeah, that's where they are right now. Of course, there's upcoming mandatory minicamp in early June. And then we're going to be heading into training camp starting in July. So there's going to be a lot going on here at PatsCast in the coming days and weeks. I do have some vacation and business travel coming up, so there will be less podcasts in the coming weeks, but we'll certainly be churning out some content, and you're not going to want to miss it once training camp starts. And, of course, mandatory minicamp and all the news surrounding the Patriots. I'm also not ruling out them making a big splash move now that the draft is passed. I know we all want to talk about A.J. Brown, and is that a possibility? But you also have Trey Hendrickson, the edge rusher with the Cincinnati Bengals, one of the best in the league. Hasn't been paid. It doesn't sound like the Bengals are really warm with the contract talks with him. He's kind of on the trade block. There's a lot of guys out there that the Patriots could make some sneaky moves for at this point. And not have to give up a lot in terms of future draft picks to get these guys, because the teams are just trying to get rid of them and offload them on the books. So I think the A.J. Brown thing is probably unrealistic at this point, but I think Trey Hendrickson is a guy to keep an eye on going forward. But we'll be here at PatsCast to cover it. If you like this video, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, or subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'll be back very soon.
New coach, new tone, Vrabel in the zone, OTAs day one, let the grit be shown. Drake in the fire, learning on the fly. 4 picks early, but he still let it fly. Defense cooking, Gonzo with the snatch. Pettis in woods and got hands to match. May came back, found bacon deep. Back shows the dark, woke the team from sleep. This the start, it's just begun. Practice heat on the Foxborough sun. Vrabel bringing juice, got the squad real tight. PatsCast ride and we break it down right. O-line shifting, Campbell got tried. White brought smoke, Farmer inside. Henderson flash, F-time with the shake. Offense slow cooking, give Maye a break. No digs, no Mondre, but the standard state. McDaniels dialing up a complex play parade. Special teams duel, our kickers clean. Wild Parker roll mode, missed a couple on the scene. Vrabel preaching no mistakes twice. Joint camps coming at eye sharp ice. Huddle crisp, vibes got flipped. This ain't Bill or Jerome.